The presidential election isn't the only 2020 race with a crowded Democratic field. Several candidates are running for the Senate from Texas. Last week, former Congressman Beto O'Rourke said he would not run for the spot and will instead focus on his White House bid. Democrats are not suffering from a shortage of candidates to take on the incumbent Republican Senator John Cornyn. In the Texas Tribune, Patrick Svitek looks at the most recent candidate to enter the Texas Senate race, Latina organizer Cristina Tzintzún Ramirez. And Patrick joins me now from Austin, Texas. Patrick, thanks very much for being with us. What can you tell us about her?
Yeah, she is pretty young, but already has a pretty long record in the progressive organizing movement in Texas. She helped found two groups that have become pretty prominent in that universe. First, the Workers' Defense Project, which fights for labor rights. And then more recently, in 2016, she founded JOLT, which is a group that specifically focuses on mobilizing Latino youth in Texas. And so in those circles, she's already very well known and also still pretty young for that kind of resume.
Well, who else is running and how are they distinguishing themselves from other candidates? Because as we mentioned, it's a crowded field.
Yeah, the race right now looks pretty wide open, and we're still waiting to hear more from some of the more prominent candidates about how exactly they plan to stand out in this field. Some of those other prominent candidates include MJ Hagar, who is a military veteran and 2018 U.S. House candidate here in Texas. She did stronger than expected in a traditionally conservative congressional district last cycle. You also have Royce West, who's a longtime state senator from Dallas. You also have Chris Bell, who's a former congressman from Houston and a former gubernatorial nominee in 2006, actually. And so you have a pretty wide array of candidates here, but none of them are known particularly well statewide, and all of them in some ways are starting as pretty unknown entities statewide.
Well, immigration and gun control are in the spotlight both locally and nationally. Any sense how Democratic voters there in Texas feel about those issues?
You know, we've seen polling here in Texas, like we've seen across the nation, where some of these measures to combat gun violence are more popular than sometimes the conventional wisdom lets on. Like you see nationally in Texas, you see voters approving of universal background checks, for example, by pretty strong margins. And even if you just look at the 2018 election cycle in Texas, if you look at the Senate race with Beto O'Rourke, he campaigned pretty vocally on some gun control measures that we haven't really seen Democrats running statewide in Texas embrace, at least in such a vocal way. For example, I mean, he was very vocal about supporting an assault weapons ban. And then in the two congressional districts that flipped in Texas, you saw Democratic nominees not necessarily make gun control their top issue, but speak pretty openly and candidly about it in a way that you may not expect Democrats running in battleground districts in Texas to speak about it in the past.
Well, what about the Republican? How popular is Senator John Cornyn, and do any of the Democratic candidates pose a serious threat at this point to his reelection?
You know, there are some differences between how he's viewed statewide and how Ted Cruz is viewed statewide, for example. So you have much more voters in Texas who don't know about John Cornyn or unfamiliar with him than you did Ted Cruz, which makes some sense given that Ted Cruz kind of burst onto the political scene here in 2012, instantly became a national figure, ran for president, was, effectively the runner-up in the 2016 Republican presidential primary, and became very well known very quickly, and also became very polarizing very quickly. With Cornyn, he's not as polarizing of a figure. That comes with both, I think, advantages and disadvantages in terms of the support you attract and how durable that support is. But one of the key differences there, I would say, is that we continue to see in polls that just more voters statewide are unfamiliar with him than they were with Ted Cruz.
So former Congressman Beto O'Rourke says he will not run for Senate, but do Democrats see him as the best option to unseat Cornyn?
You know, I think it's very unlikely that he would run for Senate under any scenario, as I think he himself said. But I think at the same time, if he were to come home and run for Senate, he is the closest thing that Democrats would have, I think, to somebody who could clear the field and really make Cornyn scared. I think right now Cornyn is not terrified of the field against him. I think he would be pretty scared if Beto O'Rourke came home and ran against him, given Beto O'Rourke's proven performance in the last cycle and ability to raise tens of millions of dollars as he proved in the last cycle. So he would definitely be a game-changing candidate if he came home and ran for Senate. All that being said, I still don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah. All right. Patrick Svitek for us. Patrick, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.